NPR, we have hosts and voiceover talent. We write the scripts, and so it's basically seamless when the listeners hear the sponsor messages. We don't allow hard sells, and we feel that it's important because the skip function is very easy in podcasts, and very few of our sponsor messages are skipped over, and we feel that's important. Host-read messages, very important. Endorsements, very popular. I'm going to talk to you a bit about what some of the more successful formats or options are. Sponsored content, you all do it now or a bunch of you do it now in digital. It's no different. A lot of brands are creating branded podcasts, Goldman Sachs, Charles Schwab, Trader Joe's. Some are better than others. We do custom audio, which we will tell a story that's in an affinity with a brand. It is not at all embedded in our content, but it also is produced in the tone and manner of the podcast and promoted throughout our platforms. When we speak to brands and they aren't involved in podcasts yet, we often recommend that they talk to the producers they already have a relationship. ESPN, New York Times, NPR, and that they should rely on the expertise of that publisher to tell them what the profile of the audience is and to guide them in terms of the voice and tone that the commercial message should have. I can't say strongly enough, this is not commercial radio, and this is not a standard commercial platform. And it's very easy to alienate the audience in the podcasting world, given that they are such light consumers of commercial media. There is programmatic opportunities we can talk about too. Direct donations have been going on for a long time. And there's also a website called Patreon. Have any of you heard of it? If you want to be a patron of the arts, and podcasting is included. So many people are supporting their favorite podcasts via Patreon. And of course, there are direct solicitations, and a number of podcast producers are offering subscriptions and memberships at different tiers, and they're also having success. So as I mentioned, the expectations and opportunities in this space are unique. Based on the research and our years doing this, authenticity is vitally important to this audience. Relevance, customization, contextualism, all very important. So give it a lot of thought before you launch it. And before you launch sponsors in this space. But it's a very special opportunity to build relevance for your brand, to build relationships, to go long and go deep. You know, people listen to podcasts for an hour. People binge listen to podcasts. We own 3 listening apps, one we just acquired called Pocket Casts. So we monitor how people are listening every second, and they will binge listen hour on end, not skipping sponsor messages. And it's fascinating. And every quarter, we measure how our audience feels about sponsor messages. 85% of NPR podcast listeners would prefer to listen to podcasts with sponsor messages than pay for a commercial-free app. So this is also something to think about and monitor if you are going to produce podcasts. It does make it tricky with sponsors. There are a number of sponsors that just won't even work with us because we won't take their creative. which in our world is literally jolting to the audience. You know, they're sort of going along with the story and ba-bang, and it's just not something that works for us. It can work for others. We have measured the effectiveness of advertising on our platform. The IAB has very similar statistics overall about awareness, purchase intent. It's very important. I was speaking to the gal from the National Geographic yesterday, and the whole issue of measurement came up in regard to brand lift and intent to purchase. We do a lot of these studies in podcasting as more Fortune 500 and traditional agencies have come in to sponsor. They need to see this data. So many direct brands have built their businesses in this space. How many here listen to podcasts? Oh, a lot of you. And you hear these sponsors over, literally they will tell you they built their business in this space, and from there they go to television, print, other platforms. This group used to be 70% of our business just a year or two ago, and now Fortune 500s are coming in, and Fortune 500s are probably now about 40% of our business, and some of the other leading podcast producers. These folks, some of them share their attribution models with us. Most will tell us whether the podcast is working or not in a matter of days. So even though measurement is not where it should be right now, we know based on the success of these direct-to-consumer brands that they're having a lot of success. So I had mentioned before that when you launch a podcast, or if you're associated with a podcast, commercial load is key. Most podcasts will have a 15-second pre-roll, 1 or 2 mid-rolls depending on the length. Post-rolls actually can be effective. This is something you need to test. But light commercial loads are really important, giving the skipping function. Tone really should be curated, how you format it. Digital ops. There are baked-in messages, which are great for some sponsors who have an evergreen message. And so when a podcast is archived, that message lives on and on. But there are other brands who want their ads switched out every week, so they're dynamically served. They come in all kinds of varieties. Some podcast platforms like AdsWiz, I don't know if you know of them, and Panoply now offer very specific audience targeting beyond just geo-targeting, age, income, interests. So that's a new and increasingly popular opportunity. The warning on that is by the time you get down to those slices, the audience can be very small. I'll also mention it's a very good time for podcasting now. There's little to no fraud. And that's because we have little to no third parties in between our ad serving and the consumer listening. I have been told it's only because there's not enough money in it for the people who like to play in this. We are merchandising the brand safety aspects and the lack of fraud in a very meaningful way to brands who are turning away from some digital platforms to be in a fraud-proof or fraud-less environment. So when we work with brands and other podcast publishers do, both for our shows and also for brand messages, we use companies that test the effectiveness of the audio. Sometimes we get very funny results. We have professional audio voice talent we use to create our audio messages, and our staff member, Kelly, comes up as popular like 35% of the time. So go figure. But it's really important that you test before you launch either your podcast, your hosts, or the brands that you're working with. Or encourage the brands you're working with to do this themselves. VaynerMedia is not a new agency, but they have a new initiative really for voice. They had a conference last week called VoiceCon, and we are all getting ready for a voice-activated future. As I mentioned, a few years ago, NPR started working with the smart speaker manufacturers in creating podcasts and content specifically for these platforms. And I think because the impact is so significant, I wanted to share a little bit about this with you. And if you guys had any questions about it, to the extent I can, I'd be happy to share what I know. As you know, it's reaching critical mass in terms of usage. The growth is actually outpacing the adoption of smartphones, which has taken a lot of people by surprise. Currently, Amazon is the leader, but Google, recognizing what's happening with search, is coming on really strong. So I would bet in the next 2 years, Google will have as much distribution, if not more, than Amazon does, and Apple is way behind. We partnered with Edison Research 2 years ago to understand the consumer relationship with smart speakers and how it was changing their behavior. For any of you interested, it's called the Smart Audio Report from NPR and Edison. We did surveys, and we also did 19 in-home ethnographic studies where we have video of how people are relating to their smart speaker. 65% don't want to go back to life without it. Despite some of the privacy concerns, 42% consider it essential to their lives. And you find all kinds of different relationships. People who are empty nesters or alone who like the companionship. People, young families who have multiple units in their house are being entertained. 50% of all listening is in a public setting. For NPR, you know, we've been producing audio journalism and storytelling for 50 years. And it's amazing because now radio is coming back into the home. And it's coming back into the home in a very different way. And so everything I just said about podcasting and respecting the audience and really giving a lot of thought to commercial interruptions, you can turn up the volume way high when it comes to smart speakers. And as you may know, Amazon is not offering sponsorship opportunities on smart speakers. Yes, they are very nervous. We actually, with our NPR News Now, we had a glitch and we ran a pre-roll by mistake and Twitter just lit up. People were furious. They were so put off. So we're very careful in terms of the sponsorship we have and how we curate it because this is a very different experience in the home with this smart speaker. It's interesting, 43% of smart speaker owners would love to hear more from sponsors, would like to participate with their skills. And so it's an opportunity for media brands and it's an opportunity for consumer brands but it's slightly different than just an app would be, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. 50% of all searches by 2020 will be voice. This is one of the reasons Google is very aggressively moving into this space, because as you know, if you make a request in voice, you get one answer. And what happens to all of the sponsors buying the number 2 to 6 search terms? So this affects Google, this affects brands, this affects publishers. It's a very big deal. And so at VoiceCon, VaynerMedia was advising its clients that they really needed to find their voice. They really needed to understand how to come into this space. And I would say the same is true for publishers. And podcasting is a really great precursor to how to show up on smart speakers and get audience listening to you. So there's really a paradigm shift as brands and publishers come into this audio, this voice-activated future. There are different expectations in terms of what you bring. Consumers expect more value. I will give a shout out again to Gimlet Media, it's an ex-NPR person. They created a skill/podcast called Chompers. And it is a twice daily routine for children to brush their teeth. And it is adorable, it's funny, it's entertaining. And it was made possible from Oral-B and Crest. And I believe, I'm not privy to these conversations, I've heard through the grapevine that Amazon allowed a waiver to mention these brands, but they don't really have a commercial in it. So here you have one of the leading forces in dental hygiene supporting a entertaining and utilitarian skill for children to brush their teeth twice a day. Very interesting. When we work with brands in our custom audio space, when speaking to a bank, I said, you might have the most attractive mortgage rates and that may be what you're pushing. So why don't you create a skill or content around the 5 most important things when buying a home? That's bringing a value. So it's a very different value proposition. And the voice-activated future bodes very well for anybody in the podcasting space. The growth will be there. The audience engagement is there. It's also becoming routine. As I mentioned, in our Smart Audio report, we also analyzed behavior by day part. People are really starting their day with their smart speaker, asking for their favorite podcast, asking for NPR's Up First. I should also mention that our podcast Up First and our NPR News Now, they are reaching new audiences for us. And I can bet you that the New York Times' daily podcast is reaching new audience for them. So this is my last slide, and this is just, a look ahead and where we're going. There'll be a growth in audience. There'll be better user experiences coming. Voice activation will have an impact. I think we're going to see a shift in digital dollars to podcasting and the voice audio space. And so for any of you interested, I think you should just get out there and experiment as much as possible. We probably serve promotional messages for 10 podcast producers coming to NPR to promote their new podcasts. We don't have any rules against competitive. And as a matter of fact, thank you to those who have the NPR One app. If you download the NPR One app, there's a lot of NPR. We probably have 200 podcasts from non-NPR producers. It is AI technology to understand what you like, and we'll serve up what you like, but we also curate it by humans too, which has definitely enhanced the listening experience. So that's a look at podcasts and what's happening, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thank you, Gina. Any quick questions for Gina? We're going to be doing a roundtable about it too, but anybody have a quick question? I wanted to ask about the structure of the advertising, since you were talking about direct brands building their businesses generally, and all of those brands are very performance oriented. Mm-hmm. And of course, a lot of the call outs in podcasts are calls to action with a specific pointing people to a URL. How are these priced? On a CPM basis, CPM plus some performance element? How are the deals structured?
I would say the majority are CPM. Mm-hmm. And I think these companies do a lot of testing, and they are vigilant in optimizing between publishers to know what's working or not. They have their attribution models, and they'll do isolated, either geo-targeted or content tests. I should mention that there are podcast rankings in terms of publishers and individual shows from Podtrac, Podtrac. But we currently sell the industry on downloads. Well, you're not sure, a podcast could be downloaded, but do you know if it's listened to? You don't. Most of our surveys say the majority of our podcasts are listened to, but you just don't know. The whole industry is coming together and moving towards a exact listening standard, which is months away. But in the meantime, it's downloads. And these companies probably apply some kind of conversion factor, and they can see directly, what the impact is.
Thanks. Yeah, hi, Bill Ullman from Smithsonian. Good to see you, Gina. Great presentation. Couple questions following up on Steve. If you're doing it on a CPM basis, most podcasts get like 50,000 downloads. A good one, that's like a hit, right? So that's not a lot of money on a CPM basis. One article on Smithsonian gets 50,000 views. So to invest $200,000 in a podcast to make $50, it seems odd to me. And so, I think it's great. Smithsonian has a great podcast. Everyone should listen to it. It's called Side Door. And we're looking for ways of funding it. And so for all of us here who are trying to think about podcasts, the financials are really tough, because it's like the app business. You got to sink a lot of money in and up front, and then hope that you get some downloads. And then, so one question is, how do we deal with that based on a 50,000 is a home run? And secondly, my understanding is a lot of podcasts are funded by donors, like donations or public money, not private money. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm sure NPR has some, right?
Well, I'll answer the first question, and that is there are a number of publishers who charge $100 CPM. There are a number of publishers who package their podcasts with their other media vehicles. There are some podcast publisher who package with events. So, creative, but a lot of media companies consider this a brand extension and part of their marketing and their quest to acquire new customers. There are foundations and individuals that support podcasts across the board. NPR does have support from foundations, but not so much individuals. The stations solicit the individual donations more, and that's a great help. But private companies and commercial companies are soliciting donations too. It's not just for nonprofits anymore. It's just great.
Gina, we're going to have a roundtable with you at the end of the morning. Thanks very much.